Truth Frequency Radio Network. KTFRN. Worldwide.
Welcome, Shadowland Voyagers. In the spirit of sovereignty and self-empowerment, we invite you to journey with us into the Shadowland. Let's rediscover, reclaim, and integrate the fragmented aspects of our individual and collectively held consciousness. Realize true freedom and restore authentic expression. Could it be the only way out is through the Shadowland? Good evening, everyone. This is Sienna with Shadowland Voyagers, and I'm here with Christina Grant. Hey, Christina, how are you doing?
Good evening. I'm doing great.
And with Elizabeth Hansen. Good evening, Elizabeth.
Good evening. Good evening, Sienna.
All right. We are so excited. We have an incredible guest on our show. Really a groundbreaking information. Amazing woman. And this is our tongue-in-cheek Valentine's Day special called The Dark Side of Cupid with Eve Lorgen. Eve Lorgen is an author, hypnotherapist, and 20-year researcher in anomalous trauma and alien abductions. She is a dedicated practitioner of Hatha Yoga with additional studies in Oriental medicine, mysticism, shamanism, and martial arts. Eve began her pioneering work with alien abductees while earning her master's degree in counseling psychology in 1992. She also holds a BS in biochemistry and worked in the biotechnology industry for 7 years. Eve started a support group in 1994 in San Diego County, California, for experiencers of anomalous trauma and continues to consult with anomalous trauma clients worldwide today while living in Western North Carolina. She was a close associate of the late Barbara Bartholic and inspired by Dr. Carla Turner. Eve authored the book The Love Bite, Alien Interference of Human Love Relationships, and is a contributing author to all 3 volumes of The Universal Seduction by Angelico Tapestri, and I hope I pronounced that right. The new book, The Dark Side of Cupid, Love Affairs, the Supernatural, and Energy Vampirism, was released last year and will be the focus of our show tonight. Eve Lorgen has also written numerous articles that can be found on her website at evelorgen.com and is internationally published in magazines such as X Times, Nexus, Jar, MUFON Journal, Enigmas, Unknown Magazine, as well as independent e-zines, newsletters, blogs, and websites. She's a frequent guest on radio talk shows, independent film documentaries, and a former radio show host of NSPN Night Search Paranormal Radio Network out of Memphis, Tennessee. She has publicly lectured across the U.S. for MUFON groups and annual conferences, independent paranormal and UFO discussion groups, and Brian Hall's Conspiracy Conference. And tonight she's here with Shadowland Voyagers. Welcome to the show, Eve.
Oh, thank you for having me on. It's a great pleasure.
We are so excited to bring this topic out. I know I personally am, as I spoke to you about a moment ago, I have been experiencing the phenomena that you're describing for years, And of course, people in this area are often considered nutcases or marginal or fictional. So I am so delighted to dive in to your research, because I know you've worked with many people and that you have in some ways quite a deep amount of documentation about the many dynamics of this. Here at Shadowland Voyagers, our mission is to help people remove the blind spots, to be able to empower themselves and become fully sovereign by seeing all that is unseen, that is manipulating, compromising our reality from the shadows, and to take radical self-responsibility to transmute our own shadow aspects so that we can achieve wholeness and sovereignty now. And so there's just so much here. First, we'd like to start with your background, if we may, to ask you how you got interested in this line of work in the first place, Eve.
Oh, that's a good question. Of course, I started out as a biochemist in my early years, and I became disenchanted in that field, not because the science wasn't interesting, but I actually had a lot of health issues because I was poisoned on a job from working with certain kinds of organic solvents and other toxins. And my employer actually denied that reality, and I basically had to deal with it on my own. And I just became disenchanted and decided that I wanted to learn more about Oriental medicine. So I studied Oriental medicine for about a year until I decided that it was more important to look into the psychological and spiritual aspects of the healing journey, because I started my own healing journey around that time. And so I got a degree in counseling psychology. Around the same time, I really seriously began investigating what I call the alien abduction phenomena in my own life, and as well as others that I started working with, and opening up that subject matter in my own support groups. So what I found was that the alien abduction phenomena had a lot of correlating issues that go along with that I call anomalous trauma, because what I saw was people who had abuse backgrounds, for example, or they were in, let's say, mind control, sexual abuse kinds of family histories, or what I call the military abduction, mind control programs, ritual abuse, spiritual warfare, and then, of course, the relationship manipulations that were a result of what I feel is not only alien interference from, quote, the alien abduction angle, which I learned from Barbara Bartholic and Carla Turner, but I also began to really, I guess, realize that this interference comes from other levels, not only within our psyche, but also other interdimensional forms of intelligence, life forms such as ghosts, entities, incorporeal aliens, demons, spirits, and familiar spirits. So there was actually quite a lot to this, but I decided to write a book about it in year 2000 after working with many alien abductees and MILABs and experiencers of anomalous trauma. And it was Barbara Bartholik's help and guidance that really helped me understand and get deeper insights into what was happening with the alien abductee, or in many cases they call themselves contactees or experiencers, or people having alien visitations or ET visitations. But to me, it doesn't matter if it's against their will and they don't have full awareness or control over the situation. I consider it an abduction, especially if there's body marks or medical issues or implants or memory loss due to mind control procedures. And I call it for what it is, unless it's something different. So anyway, I wrote the first book about the interference in relationships, and especially how they engineered love relationships in such a way that it had a characteristic pattern. And in those patterns of how that orchestrated relationship played out is very well defined in the first book I called The Love Bite. And along with that came what Barbara Bartholik really zeroed in on, what she called the love obsession phenomena, where the aliens appeared to be creating these dramas in people's lives by bonding them, let's say throughout childhood or in their teen years. They meet later in the adult life, and then they have this powerful connection with one another that makes it feel like it's their soulmate. But along with that, sometimes those two people are married to other partners, making it very difficult to consummate or make sense of. So it could create a lot of drama and chaos in the person's life. So that was basically the first book. And we believe that there was, I believe, like I wrote 4 basic reasons why I think, quote, the aliens or ETs were putting people together in these engineered relationships. And of course, the one that Barbara Bartholomew believed that was the most important was what she called emotional harvesting, or feeding on the emotional, sexual, or soul energy of those individuals, like playing them like a puppet on a string through all these dramas and myths. And then the other reason, which I found out later through working with MILAB people, and those are people who've had genuine alien encounters and visitations, but also had a military abduction component that happened alongside or after their encounters, where they were either interrogated by the military or used as operatives under mind control because of their unique abilities. And that could be because they were alien, quote, hybrids, or they had super psychic abilities or superhuman capabilities that are beyond the norm for most Manchurian candidates. So that was another aspect. And so one reason why they put 2 MILAB people together, for example, was because it amplified their psychic energy and their ability to be more psychic. So it amplified that Kundalini energy, for example. So that was a big thing that they would do. And I can go into more detail how that plays out. And the third reason was, of course, for the genetic offspring of 2 individuals chosen to mate because of their genetics. But that actually didn't happen as much as the other reasons. And the fourth reason was a disruption of an individual or 2 individuals who are either on their healing path to awakening, or they're whistleblowers or researchers, and they were targeted for neutralization or disruption. And that takes place through a disruption of a good relationship, or being sent in with what I call the Romeo agent, with someone who's under control or manipulated by either a shadow government agency or aliens to basically sow chaos and disruption in that person's life through a false soulmate type of situation. So all these things happened. And then I saw more and more of them even after I published that book, until I wrote the second book. So I'm just going to pause for a moment if you have any questions on any of those aspects, because that in and of itself is a lot of material.
Yeah. Great material. I do have a question. I wanted to back up a little bit, because I know many of our listeners are very sophisticated and don't need to know this, but there'll be some newbies here. And so my question is, what do they want with us? Why are they doing this? What are they getting out of this? Why would they leave us alone? No.
I know. That's a question that comes up, I think, for every person who's had alien encounters in their life. They're like, why me? Why me? Why did they have to choose me? And what is it? I'm not anybody special. I just want to be normal. I just want them to leave me alone. And it appears to be certainly genetics is part of it, that there may be something in their genetic line that they want to amplify or study or reproduce. That's certainly part of it. And then there's the energetic aspect, where they may harvest some kind of frequency, energy, emotion, or what I just call it soul energy, because that's the highest power that we have. And then there's others that they may be used for their agenda through reproduction, like they use them as breeders, or they just use the women. A lot of times they use the women to carry fetuses, sometimes alien or alien human hybrid fetuses, or human fetuses that have been altered or manipulated through whatever methods they're using to develop a new genetic strain. And that happens quite a bit. So it doesn't really matter. I mean, they do what they want to do regardless of how we feel about it. Although not everybody describes an experience that is, negative or fearful or painful. Some people claim to have positive experiences with these beings, or one experience will be, unnerving, whereas the next one is okay and seems to be like an ongoing relationship. So I just say, the good, bad, and ugly and everything in between needs to be put out on the table. And I'm putting out on the table what I felt was really important and marginalized in the current abduction research at the time. And I think that there's a lot of things that are marginalized, minimalized, or devalued altogether in terms of their importance. And one of them is manipulation and orchestration of love relationships and the energy of the dynamics of relationship itself. And that's something that I think is very important.
Exactly. That's a very female area of expertise, relationship, connection, and the love frequency, the true love frequency, in my experience, is very much a part of the divine feminine nature. And from my experience, and I've written extensively about that in my book, Stealing the Moon, the whole orchestration of patriarchy and of suppression of the feminine, of abuse of the feminine, it has been a massive vampirization. First of all, suppression and total control, denigration, and then in that place, feeding off of the female aspect of both male and female energy.
Yes.
It's a huge.
It is huge. It's so huge that, it's so huge that actually I was going to write, and I was writing a memoir actually before I wrote my Dark Side of Cupid, which I haven't really talked about. And a lot of the memoir, it's actually on the shelf at the moment because it was so difficult to write, because it was during my own healing process, going through a divorce and learning how to, rescue my own feminine energy and power before I was completely destroyed as a human being and as a woman. And so some of the concepts that came up during the time that I was writing the memoir was what I call the phenomenon of patriarchal narcissism, and narcissism as a psychopathology, and patriarchy itself as a psychopathic belief system designed to disempower not only women, but the entire human race. And it is destined for destruction through this system of belief, which I think, starts way back with what I call alien control or some of these false gods. And even so, it's an imbalance of what the truth is. And so I feel it's very, very important to rebirth our original power and maintain that power and respect. And it seems to me that for a woman, at least women in patriarchal culture, that our hero journey as a woman is a little bit different than a man. And what I learned in my own journey is that I had to stand up for myself, and I had to confront the perpetrator. I had to confront the narcissist, the psychopath, and stand up for myself and create firm boundaries and, set up self-respect in such a way that feminine power is not disrespected and disregarded, and actually stand up for myself in a way that appeared probably selfish to others or appears selfish to men. But we as women tend to give up ourselves and our identity, especially when we're mothers and when we're married. And then we come to find out that, years later, you find out that you gave up your career, your health is gone, your beauty's gone, and your income earning potential is zero, and you're left with nothing when you go through a divorce. And that happens to many. I'm not saying it happens to all, but it was very, very difficult for me. And so I started studying the whole thing about not only patriarchy, but what I saw was narcissism and psychopathology and how that manifests in relationships. And so when I wrote The Dark Side of Cupid, what I understood after studying the whole narcissism thing was in these manipulated relationships where there's actually a form of energy vampirism taking place, is actually the result of a lot of psychopathology that is unrestrained in either the male or the female.
Exactly.
So that to me was just so important. And it was almost overwhelming for me to even talk about it or even write about it until I wrote my book. And even so, I didn't even go into great detail on the patriarchal narcissism element because it's not a popular issue. I mean, a lot of men, they're just going to turn their heads. They're not going to want to listen to that. So
Right.
it has to be done in a way where I'm not still angry about this and wanting to blame men because it goes so much deeper than men. It actually goes to the source, which is the false gods, which have instituted and corrupted many religious systems to create the illusion that women have less value.
Yeah,
So it's really
definitely.
amazing, when you think about it. But you could see it manifesting in many cultures. So.
Yeah. Doesn't it go back to a self-worth issue for women?
Oh gosh, yes. Well, we're conditioned to believe that we have less value based on how we are treated and conditioned. So it's hard to come out of that conditioning when it's still pervasive in the culture and the social structure we live in. So that when we do stand out and say, hey, wait a minute, I have value. Not only do I have value, I have just as much value as, the man that I'm married to. And that makes us appear selfish bitches or whatever you want to call it, because the normalization has been for pathological narcissism in patriarchy. See, they've normalized abuse, they've normalized inequality, and that's unacceptable. You know what I mean? It's like,
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
so it's like when you're raised in an abusive environment where it was normalized to be considered worthless and valueless unless you can provide a sexual service for some male. I mean, that's very hard to come undone with. It's very hard to heal. And so it takes a lot of time and a lot of healing. And there's so many subtle things to this, even in our culture where, let's say, you don't even think you've lived an abused life or you think you're being disrespected. It's very subtle and pervasive, even in our society today, in the Western world. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah. I feel that this situation really plays off of a person's lack of self-worth, lack of self-love. And so this manipulated love affair, suddenly you feel
yes.
special and, oh, this is love. It's
Oh,
just
yeah.
plays all into these insecurities that we have.
Yes. And in fact, that's one of the things that I saw, what I call the vulnerability factor that made someone, let's say, a victim of, quote, the alien love bite or more of the dark side of Cupid. Because a lot of times the aliens could do things to people who are completely healthy and don't even have abuse backgrounds, and they get hit over the head. And so I don't want to blame everybody for having, let's say, vulnerability issues, but there's certain vulnerabilities that we can have through feeling a lack of self-worth or not having fulfillment in your current relationship or not having the kind of communication and connection that you need as a woman to be able to be fulfilled in a relationship. And so when those things are devalued or taken away from you or not allowed to grow, then the vulnerability is there to be manipulated by someone who comes into your life and they seem to be all the right things, but it's manipulated. And then it, throws you for a loop because you think you meet true love, but in reality, it's a manipulation. And sometimes you don't know until it plays itself out, which can take time. So in my experience, knowing Barbara Bartholic and Carla Turner's work helped me tremendously to be able to recognize something while it was happening and then be able to help others when this was happening in their life. Because there were some people, for example, in Carla Turner's book called Masquerade of Angels, she talks about the Ted Rice case, and he's an abductee who had lifelong encounters and abductions with different kinds of aliens, mind you, many different kinds. And he had a love bite set up when he was a teenager with another schoolmate. And in his situation, he didn't get help from Barbara Bartholic until, his adult years. So he went through this love bite, love obsession, painful emotional drama for something like 14 years in his life, which is a long time to be suffering from an unusual love obsession that you just can't understand why you have such a profound connection with someone until years later, you realize through the hypnotic regressions that he was set up with this girl with the aliens. And in his case, his first recollection was that they were angels that had come to him and brought him and this woman together in a group abduction where there was actually several people on this craft, but his perception, because he didn't even know aliens existed, right? You can only perceive things that's in your worldview. So he perceived them as angels. And in that particular experience, one thing that I really thought was interesting, it appeared to be a type of technology that the alien greys in that particular abduction used a type of wand instrument that was able to manipulate and encourage the weaving of the heart essence chakra energies of Ted into, let's see, it was the woman into Ted's heart chakra, and they weaved it with this wand kind of thing. And so what they did is when that happened and they weaved in her heart essence into his heart, he immediately felt like their souls were joined at that moment. So he literally took in some of her essence to actually feel this deep, deep connection, like they were one. But the thing about it, though, was that they did not reverse the process and weave in his heart energies into the woman. So she was basically glib and didn't feel that kind of connection to him, which set off this whole drama of what we called the unrequited love aspect of the alien love bite. And so that was a big part of it. So you'd have to question, well, why would they do that? And that was a big question.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the energy from that love connection, that unrequited love, that pain and longing. I mean, that's huge. That's a big harvest.
Very much so.
I mean, what's more powerful than, that love kind of feeling? I mean, violence, I guess, is the opposite and equally as strong. But wow.
It was amazing. And so I just felt the need to tell the truth about the things that were more profound and, let's say, marginalized in the research community at that time. And even now, in many ways, I think some people think, oh, well, it's just a woman's issue, or it's not scientific enough, so it's not given value. And a lot of men don't like, let's say, talking about relationships or psychology, or they think it's not hard science. And so they just rather not deal with it. Let's say in ufology, for example, where it's more about the craft and the technology and, the nuts and bolts and the science and maybe the secret projects and the time travel, but they don't talk about relationships. They don't talk about manipulated relationships or how they manipulate and mind control people to even turn a story out in the public domain. I mean, this is the biggest thing I could think of in terms of importance, because it's the core. It's the core of who we are. It's the core of power. So how could it not be important, or as important as some scientific theory on time travel or, whatever? I mean, I just...
They've been minimalizing us, our relationships, our power, our true spirit essence, our true ability.
Yes.
All that their vampire have made it. They've really done a great job and continue to this day, and through the media and through Hollywood, through every level that is bombarding us constantly, that we are nothing and that we are valueless, while their main focus is vampirizing all this rich, juicy life force that apparently they don't have direct access to.
And see, that was the question, is they are mediators of energy vampirism, the aliens. And so this is the topic that I really tried to expand on in the Dark Side of Cupid, that there appears to be entities, and they don't necessarily always have to be extraterrestrial or identified as such, like the Greys or the reptilians, but they could be what I call entities that are acting behind the mask and the archetype of Cupid. And they appear to be acting as intermediaries who are able to somehow harvest energy through a secondary mechanism. And, they may not take the people directly. They have to use this entity to orchestrate the relationship and then feed off the energy of the relationship, usually through one person, but sometimes through both people. And so I go into detail on what are the dynamics of how this takes place in terms of emotional vampirism and psychic vampirism, and then, of course, blood vampirism or just energy vampirism. Because what I saw is, instead of it being, let's say, a psychological process or neuropathy, or let's say, it's hard to explain. In regular psychology books, when they talk about energy vampirism in terms of emotional vampirism. They may speak about it from a psychological viewpoint where there's a lack in one of those individuals. Maybe they have a personality disorder, or they've disconnected from their own psychic source or core, and so they tend to feed off others. But what
Mm-hmm.
I saw was, I actually saw that also, but what I saw more often than not in the more dramatic cases was what I call the third party interference, or the third party entity, which is either overshadowing one or both partners. And in the more psychopathic partners, where let's say that person is a narcissist, or they're hosted by a non-human entity like a reptilian lizard entity, then you could see the dynamic is not just a simple psychological issue of that person. The psychic vampirism is taking place because of the entity that is partially possessed or fully possessed, or is overshadowing that person or the relationship. So really what I'm saying is that this is a sixth sense view of what goes on in relationship dynamics when there's something wrong, basically, where there's paranormal effects, and where, you know, the gut instinct of the people is like, something is wrong here. This is just not right. This is out of proportion for what, you know, the psychic linking is strong. You feel like this person's your soulmate, but there's all these dichotomies and chaos and drama. So I think it's important. I just felt like this is really important to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. How often is a person aware of an overshadowing entity?
Well, not very often, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
In general, women are more aware than men in terms of psychic perception and relationship dynamics and dynamics of the whole emotional realm. Women tend to be more sensitive, but I say that this happens equally to men and women. It's just that women are not only more sensitive and aware on that level, but they're more likely to want to talk about it, because we like to talk about our process. That's how we're made. Whereas men just kind of want to be a little bit quiet about it, unless it's so severe or bothers them so much that they have to talk about it. And so I think there was something like 30% men and 70% women reporting in the case studies in my Dark Side of Cupid book. And the ones that the men reported, they definitely had severe cases where the partner was manipulated by, you know, entity, whether it was an alien or overshadowed entity. And then the women who reported it, you know, they went from the range of maybe only emotional vampires to like the real severe vampire type. So you get a good range and flavor of what this looks like in a relationship when it's being manipulated.
How common is this, do you think, in
Oh,
relationships?
I think it's more common than people think. And when we look at, let's say, psychopathology and abuse, for example, or let's say people who are addicted to drugs and alcohol, and they're not aware of their own internal process, or they're abusive, because there's a lot of abusers who are alcoholics, for example. And then I believe that in many of those cases, that alcoholic or that perpetrator abuser is actually overshadowed by a non-human dark entity that's using them to feed off the misery that they cause others without even realizing it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and
And
just
so, I
and
mean,
alcohol just opens them up to even more
yes,
interference.
totally. So that's why it's really good to clear oneself from addictions when one has trauma, because the addictions could actually open the hole to make things worse. And yeah, drug
Wow.
abuse can definitely open windows.
Now, do you feel that all drugs can open windows? For example, I live here in Ecuador. There's quite a high use of ayahuasca in San Pedro. And I'm seeing with some of the shamans down here that they really aren't aware of the amount of entities that are coming in these wormholes when they blast people open. Others do seem to be more aware, and people do seem to be able to break through programming and reconnect with the
Oh,
earth and the universe in ways that their programming has had them so dissociated from that they need something that powerful to
yeah,
reconnect. Um,
yeah.
so it's very hard to make a judgment call in all cases, it seems to me, and in all situations. But have you had any experience with ayahuasca or any of these?
Well, I haven't taken ayahuasca, although I have had clients who have, and both positive and negative experiences. One where it actually opened up windows where entities came into his experience and wouldn't leave. So I think it really depends on the person and their teacher. If their teacher could guide them through a safe experience and do protection prayers so that during this experience they're protected from the marauding entities which will try to come in and come in through these wormholes, and they do, and they can come through. So, but I think, certain sacred journeys can open up one's consciousness to realize deeper things and be helpful. Although there's a lot of controversy over whether or not one should have to take any kind of drugs to do that.
Yeah.
Well, that would be
it's-
my question is whether, can people develop the discernment to recognize whether the love connection is orchestrated or manipulated by supernatural forces?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's actually why I wrote the book in a more simplistic way. Instead of focusing on the alien abduction angle and that angle, I decided to focus on relationship dynamics and how they appear, what they feel like, what kind of symptoms and signs present themselves when there is interference, so that you could basically tell. And I suppose that people who are naturally a little bit more psychic are able to perceive it probably more quickly than someone who's a five sense kind of person. But even so, there's even physical sensations you can get when you're being attached to by a psychic vampire. You will have physical symptoms of emotional of draining of energy, and like the solar plexus will be involved in terms of feeling that being pulled on, or sometimes pain or a grinding sensation. You may get headaches, so there may be physical symptoms, and I have like a whole page of symptoms that one could recognize if this is happening. But I tell you, the big mystery of this was the psychic connection that takes place when you're with someone in one of these relationships, that the connection is very strong and powerful. And sometimes people remember past lives with that other partner, and they have stronger feelings and connections with them than they did maybe with anybody in their life. And they can't understand why. And it's like a drug they want to keep going back to.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that symptom is actually what psychic vampires and vampires are able to do with the people that they connect and feed off of. And it was a mystery to me why, the love was so strong, and which is why it's so difficult. I mean, a lot of people think, well, gee, if someone's doing this and doing that, what's the problem? Just break up with them. But in many of the cases, they couldn't do that. It was like a drug. That the connection was so powerful.
Yeah.
So it really goes beyond. You'd have to experience it yourself to really know, I think.
Yeah, it's not your typical attraction with just some butterflies in your stomach kind of thing. It's why,
Right.
I mean, that's why it's so dangerous, because it's so compelling, so mysterious and incredible. It just seems like this amazing spiritual and psychic connection. And that's where you're saying that's the hook
Yeah.
that pulls someone in. It's like, oh my gosh, wow, this is the most amazing thing that's ever happened to me. But at the same time,
Yeah.
then you've got that emotional turmoil going on.
Yeah.
So yeah, you write in the book, good soulmate matches lack the emotional draining, dramatic highs, crashing lows, and elements of emotional manipulation and psychopathology.
Yes.
That's a
Yes.
huge point there
And I think,
to note the
I mean,
difference.
yeah, because so many people think, oh, but haven't you, come across any good ones? And they're just hanging on to this hope that their love affair is special, then they're not. I don't know. I guess I've run across people who still want to believe in the fantasy, and not to say that soulmates can't exist. They can, but if there's a psychopathology element and the manipulation element, and the partner's awareness is very low, or their ability to communicate compassionately and relate in a functional, compassionate, emotionally intelligent way, then I would say that the relationship is going to cause a lot of suffering down the road. And you gotta be realistic about what the situation is. And there's so many people, I think women in particular, they want to hold on to a relationship even if it's unhealthy, because they don't want to be alone, or they feel like they're not complete unless they're with someone. And I say that that's part of programming right there, is that, we need to be able to stand up for ourselves and the integrity of relationships, the integrity of love, marriage, family, and to not normalize psychopathology and abuse and inequality in any way, shape, or form. And that's what you call, I suppose, some aspect of codependence, or what they call the co-enabler of a abuser or a perpetrator or a drug addicted person. That women in particular,
it's huge.
I mean, we tend to put up with more because of the patriarchal conditioning, and that's something that has to stop. And it takes women to stand up to this, because we're the ones who are often more hurt and sensitive to these issues, and it's up to us to take responsibility. The men aren't going to do it. There's no reason for them to, if they're benefiting. I'm not saying that they're all bad. I mean, there was a lot of men who had really, shocking experiences, and really the vulnerability factor was one of the biggest, was the lack of awareness that this could even happen or exist. So this can happen to a normal, perfectly healthy person, and you'd be hit over the head with this and be absolutely shocked.
Do you find that women tend to be the target? Like it's two people, but the woman is the one that they want to harvest the energy from more so, or disrupt their life, or do you find that?
Well, all I know is that women report it more, and we are a more direct link to energy, although they can pull energy off a man through a woman. And a lot of times, actually, men, I mean, I hate to say this, sometimes men are more easily manipulated in that realm, simply because of the lack of their connection between heart and sexuality and awareness of dynamics. They're more easily manipulated because of their sex drive in particular. But then again, there's a lot of women who are easily manipulated because of their own sense of powerlessness and need for a man, and putting up with abuse and craziness, But I mean, we all have energy, and we all have aspects of male and female in us. So I think humans is what we have a soul. That soul power is what these entities seem to feed off of. So, and they have a way of accessing it through both male and female.
Yeah, it's just incredible, this normalization of abuse, and the programming that a woman really is not worth anything without a man. Now, Western women will go, oh, well, we outlived that in the 60s, and we're so over it.
Not
but
really.
If you look, we're not. Yeah, that's a lie anyway. Some of people spend more money and go to more seminars and to be attractive to a man, to get a man, to look for a man. A woman does not feel, and this is social conditioning. A woman is not a success. Her life hasn't been fulfilled. She's failed. She's less than. She's an outcast. My God, in India, if you didn't have a man, or if your man even died, they would put you on the pyre and burn you because you were completely useless without a man. Of course, this is extreme, even though it's still going on today, although they are trying to stop it. But the programming is very, very, very deep in the female psyche.
Yes, and I think it's it. I'm hearing echoes and sounds. I'm not sure if you can hear it.
See if this is better.
Yep, that's good.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's just as we were getting heated up, I know I can go on about this because I feel so strongly about, tracing the roots of the lies and the illusions in patriarchy and the beings and the false gods behind that. And really naming a name and naming a spade, and basically calling on the lie. And it is a big lie. And a lot of these lies are in, Christianity as well, and a lot of religions and where they came from. So that's why I was so adamant on researching this and trying to find the root core and just ripping it out from the root. And if I could identify, I mean, if you could identify, let's say, evil, and I know this sounds black and white, but if the entity does not have a benevolent motivation, how would its behavior manifest in your experience. And what I can tell, it's basically theft of your attention and your soul energy without regard to your feelings, your needs, and who you are and what, and what you need. So, and then the explanation for something that's benevolent would be something that is giving and caring and empathic of what your needs and feelings are, and not to take energy, but to give and receive equally in a mutual fashion. And so when you look at relationships, of course, we all want to have something that is equal, where we're respected for equality. But I think we get mixed up in the Western world where women want to be as valued as men. But what happens is that we try to be equal in terms of jobs and capabilities, where we need to understand that we have equality in our complementarity already as we are, without having to be the scientist in astrophysics or do a man's job, for example. We can do what we're good at, what's based on who we are and our natural talents, and be just as important and just as valuable. The problem is that we're not paid those wages with what we're good at. So we're still devalued. Even if we're really good at what we do and have a talent, we're still devalued on a financial and economic level. And that really, really hurts. And it forces so many women into going into careers and going against your own nature, going against your own soul, going against your own heart, just so that you can be economically viable without having to depend on someone who's going to consider you less than. So it's a real difficult thing for women. We still haven't navigated that equality. I think there's equality in our complementarity, and that's okay. And so if we just want to be a homemaker and make our home beautiful and be a great cook and take care of kids and be nurturing, I think that is very valuable as it is. The trouble is we're not paid for it. And when you get divorced, or if you get divorced, you're left out to be low income producing, or you're left to be in poverty. So it makes women not want to be who we are, because we're so afraid of being left in poverty. You see so many single women, single Black women in particular, women in divorce. I mean, look at the disparity of incomes. They're 4 times more likely to end up in poverty than men. And it's not because we're stupid at all. It's not because we don't have capabilities. It's just because we're not paid what we're worth for what we're good at.
And this so much drives us back into this psychopathological programming, because it seems to me that the fix, the healing for this, is in connecting with our authentic energy. And the female energy has its own female intelligence. It's about nurturing and caring for life and being present in ways that the patriarchy has completely disvalued. And we're not going to be able to break our addiction or stopping harvested by these vampiric forces. To me, the only fix is claiming our sovereignty, and that means being truly connected and manifest as authentic female energy. So yeah, it's very, very challenging.
And just
do you agree with that?
Oh gosh, yes. And I mean, I still struggle in my own life because it's hard to make a living doing it all alone and going against the grain of the value system. And so it's difficult, but it's true that connecting with that feminine power and your own soul is the key to the wisdom and the empowerment that you need to have in order to get through the vulnerabilities and the weaknesses that we have. And it's definitely, I think it's a challenge for many women, but maybe men too, because they have to put up with a lot of women being really unhappy and feeling frustrated that, we're always unhappy, that may be their complaint. But we're in a society where we're kind of confused, and we fall back into the old-fashioned traditional role models, and you're left to be devalued and end up in poverty. And then when you try to be like a man, you're completely exhausted because you're doing more jobs for much less money. And so you have to do 3 times as much to even almost break even. I mean, it's really hard for women with children who are married and have careers. It's even though we're getting kind of off topic here, it's just it's easy to lose our center.
Yeah, it's really is
Yeah.
honesty because this in this first section we wanted to talk about how do we identify when we're in one of these relationships. Well, if we can't bring our own authentic energy into our bodies and know the difference between our female soul or spirit and what that is, then how are we ever going to go, oh, this is a vampiric energy entering my field?
Yes. Oh, yes. And well, that's some of the things that I talked about in my book, where like a whole third of the book is healing strategies, and for example, psychological intervention strategies like learning how to communicate compassionately and reflectively and with emotional intelligence in a relationship so that both people are able to get their needs met and express their feelings in a way that the other partner doesn't feel blamed or criticized or judged. That's just one big thing. But there were other strategies that I talked about, which had to do with the paranormal intervention strategies when you're dealing with something difficult, like the attached entity and the aliens interfering, or, you're being harassed, where it's a vampire situation. Then you have to be much more firmer and learning how to set boundaries and communicate. But the problem when you're dealing with a psychopath, or let's say somebody who is partially
Do we
possessed by
lose
an
you?
entity, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, just
Oh, okay. Yeah, it seems like whenever we get heated up. Yeah, and well, one of the things that I really wanted to emphasize in the book is that, compassionate communication skills are good to have. That's what a lot of people don't have that. We don't grow up with learning that. Something sometimes we have to learn when we're an adult because we have problems in relationships and end up going to maybe couples counseling to find out, wow, I never really learned how to communicate my needs and feelings. And I grew up in a family where we just kind of kept everything under the lid and didn't talk about it. And so ended up with all these passive aggressive behaviors or whatever. So it's important to learn how to communicate, and that kind of goes against the grain of many conditioning in our culture and our families. But the paranormal intervention strategies is you got to be strong in learning how to set boundaries with the energy vampire people, and that may require much more firmer assertive skills. Which means confronting the perpetrator and confronting the emotional vampire. And that can be very difficult. A lot of women in particular have difficulties with confrontation because they feel like they're being a bitch and they don't want to be aggressive. But sometimes you really have to stand strong when someone like that is in your presence and they're continually manipulating and taking your time and sucking your energy. You have to put your foot down and say, this is not okay. And this is why. And this is what I need. This is what I want. This is what you're doing. This is how your behavior is affecting me and everybody else. And what are you willing to do about it? And a lot of people aren't willing to go there. It's just a real scary place.
So important to have that honest communication.
Yes.
So your book is divided into 3 sections, which is really helpful because the first part, we've talked about that a bit, was how to recognize whether a love connection is orchestrated or manipulated, and the awareness, which is imperative, right, to understand and recognize these symptoms. You have a list of red flags in your book. Would you mind if we read those?
Yeah. And I call these the red flags, which are the more overt signs if you think your relationship is being manipulated or orchestrated, influenced. Maybe you'll have dreams of the partner before meeting them, suggesting a precognitive factor. And that in and of itself is not, quote, negative. That could happen in any relationship or a good one. Physical sensations in the solar plexus, genital, gut, or other body areas such as neck, heart, and between the shoulders. Sometimes pain or sudden pain or weird grinding sensations or weird pulling sensations and heat.
Like
This one was big.
Kundalini?
Yes, you can have Kundalini activation, which was unusual for that particular situation. You could have astral sex visitations or what I call telesthesia. And that's sensing the energy body, and usually in a sexual way and very physically, as if another being were present but invisible. So some of the reports would be they actually felt their partner, or actually it was the entity that was actually working through them. They would come and visit them and astrally rape them or have sex with them. And sometimes it was pleasant, but it was as if it was physically right there in the room and invisible. Very, very powerful. You could have a strong psychic connection, even though you may not really love your partner. That's out of proportion for that person or that relationship. And it feels like a soulmate. Okay. So this is why I was going to call the book The Counterfeit Soulmate Connection as a subtitle, but I actually changed my mind. Powerful sexual passion and obsessive need to have sex or be with the partner, even though the partner may not love you and or if they're abusive. You could have psychic responses and coincidences from either partner, like receiving a phone call or email from your partner the moment you think about cutting off the connection. You have a lot of telepathic linking and synchronicities, a sense of emotional and physical draining, or one partner becoming suddenly switched off emotionally or psychically unplugged. And that was a big thing in the love bite as well. Let's say an abduction occurred or the aliens came back, and then all of a sudden after that, they no longer had feelings for the partner, and it was because it was manipulated. Feelings of being watched or being played like puppets in some drama myth. And that was a big one, the whole thing about feeling like you've been thrown in this drama, in this theater, being buffeted around like characters in a myth.
Like a lack of control, like you just have to do this sort of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Of course, paranormal activity, third-party entity visits or attacks, sudden dreams, visions, and thoughts as if they're implanted in your mind, obsessive thoughts that are not usual for either partner, and of course, synchronicities, omens, and a feeling of being in a magical reality. And then, of course, I go on and go into a long description and commentary on that and with respect to the cases in the book and describing the pathological aspects of it as opposed to, let's say, a good soulmate connection or a good relationship. Because sometimes you can have a strong psychic connection and link and synchronicities with a partner that's good, and it turns out to be a good relationship and they get married. So I really wanted to make sure that people could recognize this for what it was and then be able to nip it in the bud if it was a problem. Because if we can understand how someone's being manipulated or preyed upon, this is the most simplistic way that we could recognize and deal with it if it's right here in a personal relationship. And then, of course, we could deal with it on a larger scale. Just like, in your politics, for example, or your company or global national problems. And I mean, I go into this also more with the MyLab situations, but I don't think I'll go into that until we finish. I guess we talked about how there's three main aspects, or how I divided the book into three parts.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Let's leave it there for a moment because we need to take a break, and then we'll go into the second part about how to deal. We talked a little bit about all of these things sort of in the beginning, but we can get more in depth about how to deal and resolve these types of relationships when we come back from break. Thanks.
There's only one choice. To resist.
This is the Truth Frequency Radio Network.
Welcome back to Shadowland Voyagers. We're here with Eve Lorgen discussing her book, The Dark Side of Cupid. Now, in your book, you have a number of stories that fall into four main categories of manipulated love connection based on the severity of impact. Can we discuss that a little bit?
Oh, yes. Okay. In fact, I put together a lot of cases, and I thought I had to define them and categorize them to make it more easy to understand. And so I categorize them according to, let's say, the least severe to the more severe cases based on how they affected the individual or the couple. And so the first set of cases, I guess, was where there was just a basic level of emotional vampirism and manipulation, where it could have been alien abduction related, where it was kind of a mild case, even though that's not even mild, really, in quote, normal people who don't even have these experiences. But I kind of categorize them between something that could be recognized through emotional manipulation. Maybe they didn't see entities, but they suspected them. And then the second category, which I found was very interesting, which I probably should do a bigger study of, but because I just didn't have time, I didn't. But this was where the couple had a partner who was involved in channeling or a kind of guru situation where that channeler or the guru, their entities were manipulating and orchestrating the entire relationship. And also the relationship had the signature of these people playing out a drama myth, as if these entities were literally like gods playing a game with this couple, making them think that they had to, fight off all these forces of evil, and they were Isis and Osiris, or playing drama myth kinds of characters, and they were putting them through these fantastic dramas. And it was like a game of the entities. And that was really interesting, and where there was still a vampirism element because of the high emotional vampirism element. And then the third case was where there was a definite witness and observation of what I call the third party entity, where there was a moderate form of emotional and psychic vampirism. And that was where it was observed to either be an alien, like an alien gray, or a reptilian, or it could be a type of demon or troll spirit, or a snake-like being. There was cases like that. And then the far end of the spectrum, what I call, where there was the severe psychic vampirism elements, where there was psychopathology or definite emotional manipulation in one partner who was overshadowed or partially possessed or even fully possessed by a non-human entity that definitely was a feeder of some sort of emotional energy and psychic energy. And actually one of them could have been a blood vampire as well in one case. And then I actually had two other categories. And one category was where the relationship that someone had, they were people who've had classic alien abduction or MILAB histories, which is military abduction along with alien encounters, where they were set up with what I call the classic alien love bite, where it was a false soulmate situation where there was the emotional drama and all that kind of stuff. And then they later met someone that they thought was their true soulmate, where benevolent entities helped them get together, and the evil entities were trying to disrupt the true love, like in the movie The Adjustment Bureau. And I don't know how many people are familiar with that theme, but it basically goes that there's these watcher type of beings, or these gods who are, for some reason, do not want powerful true love to happen. And so actually I've seen this in many cases where the frequency of true powerful love and soul connected love, they continuously try to disrupt in many ways. And one of the ways that they're going to disrupt is by setting up with what I call the false cookie cutter cutout soulmate partner, which is like the love bite, the false love bite. So that was another set of cases. And then the other ones were cases that were from Barbara Bartholomew before she died. She had several cases where she was able to connect without a shadow of a doubt a classic alien abduction experience where there was something to do with UFOs and aliens, and a correspondent love obsession that took place with the individual, whether it was a dramatic change in sexuality or a love obsession, and also where there was the element of what she calls, she called it demonic possession in a couple of the cases where there was actually a possession taking place in addition to the energy and emotional vampirism and sexual vampirism. So, I try to lay it out on the table. It's like, if you can't see the connections here, then you don't know nothing because this is as blatant as it can be, so that if this is taking place, you can recognize it. And that was my main goal, was that, okay, you're going to be able to recognize it. This is what it looks like when it's not good, and this is what it looks like when it is good.
You've done such a great job at that. I mean, if anyone recognizes, if this sounds at all familiar, or you think you might have experienced this, or you're going through this, do yourself a favor and buy Eve's book. Save yourself a lot of trauma.
Definitely. And I still actually am working with streamlined methods of healing. And many people who are in the field of alien abductions will do hypnotherapy in a way that they can get the memories of, let's say, amnesic parts or experiences that they've had. And I kind of actually didn't do a lot of that. I never really felt comfortable just pulling up memories for people. I feel like as a counselor and someone who's more into the relationship dynamic aspect, I feel it's more important to heal your own wounds before even going into the memories, and working on ways to close those doors of vulnerability so that the memories will start to uncover themselves more naturally once you have a firm foundation with what I call the soul connection. So what I've done is actually adapted my own counseling methods, which involve compassionate communication and inner empathy and working with parts of the self in a compassionate way, and then adapting what I call Dr. Corrado Malanga's liberation techniques, which are kind of a neurolinguistic visualization and mental simulation is what he calls it. And there's three basic methods that I actually do. I could work together with them and work with one or the other. And one of them is something we called flash mental simulation, and it's designed to work with neurolinguistic archetypal speech in a way to get the person or the abductee a way to connect with their immortal soul aspect. And once that can take place, then we use that power and connection to perceive and observe the body, which sometimes we refer to it as the container, because that's what the aliens consider our bodies. They call them containers. I always thought that was kind of weird, but we do that to visualize what's inside the body, including implants or alien parasites or attached entities in some way, so that we work on deleting that through the soul power of the individual. So this actually accomplishes a good thing. It actually helps the person tap into their own power and their own process instead of running to a guru or running to a deity, which may be another one of these false gods that just puts them right back into the same game. So it's amazing how many times, someone has said, well, gosh, I've prayed and prayed and prayed and nothing's working. How come the aliens keep coming back? And there's a lot of deep wounds that I believe that have to be healed and dealt with in order to really get a firm soul connection and foundation going, so that you could use that power to basically unplug these alien parasites. And so we do that along with other methods in a color test, which is pretty interesting. And I just put a post on my website, and it's an 8-part series that talks about this triad color test, which is based on Bohm physics and Sheldrick's morphogenic field and quantum physics to help use archetypal soul and language and visualization to actually do a soul integration process with all these aspects of our self that get disconnected deliberately by the aliens who are interfering. So they will actually deliberately interfere so that we have less awareness of that. So really, it's a plundering of awareness that is taking place, a theft of awareness, and we're reclaiming that awareness and that deep soul foundation connection. So I feel that alone is more important than just trying to pull up memories, because if you just pull up traumatic memories while there's still a deep sense of powerlessness and disconnection from soul and source, while the aliens are totally taking advantage of the person, that actually could be more damaging to the psyche, in my view. So I would rather people heal the wounds, learn how to connect and communicate and connect with their soul, and then eventually they're able to delete the vulnerabilities and the weaknesses which make them more vulnerable to certain kinds of manipulation. And this is a challenge. I admit it's a challenge, especially with people who've had what I call the MILAB experience, or those who've had MK Ultra or ritual abuse histories, where there's definite dissociation and programmed parts in their psyche. So I don't think everything's 100%. Each person is very unique in what their issues are, but these methods are actually pretty good. We're finding some success with them, so that's good.
I think you really hit the nail on the head there when you said we have to heal our wounds, because that's their way in to connect with us.
It is. Yeah.
So, and once we do that, then we're able to fully integrate with our spirit and our soul that's what keeps us in an unintegrated split consciousness. And what you're saying, that's what they are trying to keep us from doing.
Right, right.
So that's
It's
huge.
amazing, and they do it through deception. I mean, I guess I get unnerved when I see deception. I think maybe it's my life mission to find deception and to just nip it in the bud when I see it, especially in spiritual deception and psychological deception. I just won't stand for it. And if I perceive that there are entities and false gods manipulating people to believe things that aren't true in order to manipulate their ego and, flatter the ego, make them feel special, before you know it, they're just a manipulated Muppet. And we see this in cults in particular. And the whole cult thing is really big with what I call the psychopathic guru type who's hosted by a non-human entity. And this is something that Barbara Bartholick was well aware of, as well as some of my own colleagues who were involved in cults and realized years later that the cult was manipulated by a non-human entity such as a reptilian, although it could be different types of entities that primarily can work through these types of psychopathic personality types. And I'm not saying that all, quote, channelers or gurus are of this nature, but there's a lot of the false ones out there who can do a great deal of psychological damage, but also have like these weird paranormal capabilities that just throws you for a loop when it happens to you. And so sometimes you have to work with a shaman or do some good intervention strategies on your own to disengage from their power. So yeah, and I would have never thought that I would have learned this or did this on purpose. You know what I mean? I just ran into it in my own case studies and in my own work, and basically had to learn some shamanism techniques of my own to learn how to deal with this. So it takes a lot of healing work.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to send you my book. I have in Stealing the Moon, we have Yogeshwar Muni, and the things you're describing are just
really?
chapter after chapter in Stealing the Moon. Absolutely. His cult and the love bite, and the only part that you haven't mentioned is the aspect of that I was actually taken into a contract with somebody way in a past life that that one of the founders of Patriarchy and Akhenaten,
Really?
like here, yeah, Akhenaten and Nefertiti, and at that time she goes under his power without realizing it. He incests all but one of their daughters, and she is so devastated by losing her position as queen of the world. She does nothing to protect her daughters.
Oh, wow.
And this is where she falls into the underworld, and is through sexual ritual he is using her female divine energy inverted. She becomes his hit woman to go and do all kinds of perverse and heinous satanic acts. The female is actually the battery for the patriarchy to utilize that. So she becomes a dark sister, and which is actually the story of my life, and it's all in Stealing the Moon. And so my journey has been to understand that I had become one of these dark hit women for the patriarchy. So the recovery process is quite similar, and everything you're describing is quite parallel. And we actually have a forum, Shadowland Forum. We have a whole thread there called Confessions of the Dark Sisters.
Oh, wow.
Because my spiritual teacher, Aisha, felt that the power holding the patriarchy together are women, whose energy has been taken down and has been vampirized, and that they're using this, and without our power, they have no power because they have no direct connection to life. Wow. So, yeah.
That's actually true. Women are actually used against ourselves or our families, and unhealed women in particular will, be the co-abuser sometimes, and allow that and then normalize the abuse and then not stand up for themselves or their children there's just so many societies where this is still taking place. And we are the ones with the power. And it's unfortunate that we've allowed this to take place. So many of us have allowed it, not knowing what we've done, even on our own lives, by giving our power away to men.
That's right. That's right. And
Yeah.
so we can stand up and say, we do need to stand up and say we won't be abused, but we also need to do that shadow piece of where are we the abuser? Where have we been complicit with this?
Yes.
And actually fueling this? And actually, I mean, the mothers are the one raising the boys.
Yes, that's true. Yep.
They're the conditioners putting them right into this false programming.
Oh.
So there are two sides. This is the dark feminine. And so that's been kind of, yes, I want to send you my book. I think you'd.
Well, I would love it. Oh, my goodness. That's so juicy, all that right there. I mean, I've seen this in, let's say, some cultures. I won't say which ones because it's not kind to nitpick. Where some cultures where the women are naturally devalued, and so when they have a son, they raise him to be the oh so special one, even if she has daughters, and then the son basically grows up to be a narcissist, and then narcissists cause more damage in their families, and then women are responsible for raising narcissist boys because they haven't dealt with their own issues of devaluation inside.
Yeah, I'm in Latin America. I'm in Ecuador right now, and I love Ecuador, and I love the people of it. They're very earth-based, but this is rampant here. Rampant. These little boys with these super, I would call it Napoleon complex, and they just empower them to be this way. So they grow a generation of abusive men, and it's so programmed in. It's just, I'm actually. It's very challenging to break that with people who are more of a tribal or a mythic mentality.
Oh, I could see that, yeah. And of course, there's those women also who help this deep, I don't even know what to call it, abusive mentality where, let's say, they are victim consciousness and they're the whining manipulator, guilt types who are always trying to inflict guilt and manipulate, but they won't stand in their power and deal with their shit, so to speak. And then they actually help make things worse by being the manipulators and the guilt inflictors, and they don't communicate clearly, and they make the man being all bad when they're not dealing with their shit. And I've seen a lot of that because they don't know how to, they haven't healed their wounds, they haven't learned how to be assertive and talk about the real feelings and needs and communicate effectively, and get out of a relationship if it's not good for them, instead of blaming. I mean, I've been in that position myself for many years until I realized, what am I doing? I got to stand up and take responsibility for my own happiness and quit blaming and just deal with it and get out if I have to get out, and then just start working on my own healing process. And that was really hard. It's easier to blame someone else than dealing with your own stuff sometimes.
Absolutely. And the flip side of that for me in my journey was my own narcissistic sort of tendencies. Because of the way I was raised, I had to fend for myself emotionally and otherwise, and so I became very much all about me. But on the flip side of that as well was I would blame others for my unhappiness. So it still kind of played out the same way, but it came from a different energy in a sense.
Yeah, and it's funny. I mean, there's a lot of I've learned things from doing things the wrong way or being raised in an abusive environment. I have to admit it. And I learned a lot of really dysfunctional ways of relating until I got therapy and counseling and started learning about these things. But one of the things that I noticed with women in particular is that we like to talk, and we need to process how we're feeling on a verbal level with other women and with other people in general. It's a way we relieve stress. We need to talk more. But the problem is, if you don't, like, say, deal with your issues or have chronic unhealed wounds, it turns into a gossiping thing where you actually use your friendships or whoever, family members, to dump on, instead of really truly communicating in a mutual way where there's mutual respect for the needs and feelings of the other person. So there's a lot of women who they think, oh, well, I just need a girlfriend to talk to. It's like, no, they need to dump on you, and then they won't deal with their stuff, and they don't. So there's a lot of things that we do that we could stop doing and stand in our power. And so there's ways that we have to learn how to be what I call mutual in our communication tactics, where we definitely take into consideration what is the other person needing and feeling right now, and how can we have a mutual exchange right now on an emotionally intelligent level. And this is how I want my friendships to be. I don't want to be a counselor for someone. I want to be their friend. And when I'm a friend, we're on a mutual level. I'm not playing therapist for them, because that's unhealthy. So that's something that I had to learn how to do as a counselor by nature. So it's a big learning process. And that means, not dealing with some people and setting boundaries and saying, I'm sorry, but I really don't want to relate on this level. I can't talk right now.
Yeah. It's about
So-
taking responsibility for your feelings, your wounds, your everything. I mean,
Yeah.
it's such a huge step up in responsibility and self-empowerment. I just love your work. I thank you so much for sharing this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a learning process, and I guess part of my work is maybe doing a memoir, or I may turn it into a fiction, because some of the things that I went through in my life was so unbelievable and so bizarre and sad that I didn't know if this was going to fly, to tell my truth and my story. But as the healing process goes, a lot of times that's what we need to do. We need to tell our story to heal, even if it's just writing in a journal or speaking with someone else. But I think it really does help to tell your story if it's something that helps you heal, and then finding a good forum for that can receive the story in a way where you're not going to be blamed and attacked, but received in a compassionate way.
Yes, this is very much what we want. We want to offer here with the Shadowland Forum, and we're looking for other venues as well, where people can come and speak their truth in mutual support, where they're not going to be trashed or judged or put down. And we've had several women stepping up and doing that on the forum. Wow. They've had huge breakthroughs in their lives. Awesome. And one of them has just started an incredible Facebook page about bringing back authentic female energy and what are those real qualities. And she's just flowering because she had a chance to go through that. This is where I've really been at. And the level of darkness, because when you talk about the huge power of the divine feminine that has been suppressed for so many eons, there's just a gigantic frustration there.
Yes.
I mean, it's like a bombs going off, and then the divine feminine is coming back, and so there's a huge story that we need to tell, a huge purification, a huge expression, and then transmutation. But to think that we're just coming back as these gorgeous goddesses that now are going to heal and save the world without any of going through what we call the Shadowland to do that seems very unrealistic, considering that for thousands and thousands of years we've been suppressed, demonized, tortured, and abused, and that energy is very, very frustrated and very, very angry. And that's what I found is my anger and my rage and all of this frustrated sexuality and frustrated love is what these aliens, through my main handler, would just use me. I mean, I would just create destruction for them. I mean, I was a really juicy tool for a long time.
I think I was too. I was very frustrated and never felt loved and couldn't understand why. And I just think we have to love ourselves and stand firm. And sometimes that means being alone for a while we do our healing process, Although I think it's going to take women in power to transmute and change the world so that the world has a chance to even survive what's coming.
I agree.
And that there's too many men in power that has become imbalanced, and they're under illusion and mind control, so they don't know anything else but to just kill each other and destroy each other and not understand why things aren't working. And it's because the divine feminine wisdom has been denied and devalued, marginalized. And then I don't think these things would happen if we stood up and were able to be in better positions of power and to make relationships and relationship dynamics much more important than it is today. Even in organizations and companies and politics, there's a devaluation of emotional intelligence. They don't even know what it is.
Yeah, and it is the solution. But it absolutely has to get out there. And yet most of the women in power have become men, and they're subject to the same mind control and alien. We see these key power figures, and they are completely taken over, in my opinion.
Yeah,
for this alien agenda.
I'm glad you brought that up, because the alien agenda is part of, the dark side of Cupid in terms of how they take people over, whether it's individuals or whether it's families or companies or nations or political groups. I wrote this book so that you could identify it in every way, so that, you got a problem, you deal with it. And so there's a lot of places in, the shadow government, for example, and, secret societies, you basically have hosted people who are literally taken over by dark powers, including women. It's not limited to men. And this is the problem. And then how you can identify when souls are trapped, repressed, partially possessed, or taken over, there is a certain way you can identify that. And all you have to do is read my book, The Dark Side of Cupid, and you got the answer right there. And you got a solution.
Mm-hmm. Well, backing up a little, what can a person first initially do? Say they're in this they go, oh my God, that's me. That's what's happening. And the light bulbs are going off. What's the first thing they can do? Because, of course, the healing and the identifying the wounds, taking responsibility, that's a longer process.
Oh, yeah.
But what's the first thing that they can do?
Well, I think if they're in a relationship with someone and they do have a connection that they value and they want to nurture that love, it's the responsibility of what I call the more aware partner to learn how to compassionately communicate with their partner. And sometimes that means you need help with a counselor who can help mitigate any kind of stress or anger or feelings of being blamed or judged, any kind of threatening environment, so that the communication can take place with the more aware partner to talk to the partner about, well, this is what I'm observing here. This is how I'm feeling about it. And these are the needs that are underneath those feelings that are the root of what's happening. And this is maybe a request to the other person what the other partner wants. Like, and I have examples in my book about real simple vignettes of communication dynamics. And let's say something happened and the woman had, a feeling about that. And then she describes it in a way where she takes responsibility for the feelings in a non-judgmental way towards the other partner, so that the partner is able to receive the communication in a more effective way. But there's also what I call, when you have a big disparity between awareness between partners, where one partner is really aware and the other one is just not aware, then you have to decide, is this other partner willing to learn and go through this communication and awareness process so that they can nurture the love, or are they going to be stubborn, not willing to do what it takes to, nurture the relationship? And so it's the decision of the most aware partner to either continue with the relationship with communication and help the other partner learn, or to cut it off and set those boundaries so that no more abuse and harm could take place. So it's a difficult decision, because more often than not, there's one partner who's much more aware than the other. And there's definite cases you could read in the book where that's exactly the case, where, you're dealing with a partner who's not aware of their own process. They have a lot of unhealed wounds, or they're really manipulated, and they don't know it. And they need to know it. And that's real difficult to hear if you're in that position. You don't want to hear that you're being manipulated and you got all these problems. I mean, that's going to set off a lot of defenses. So it has to be done in a way that's very compassionate, and you have to take in consideration each person's needs and feelings, and not consistently deny your own feelings all the time. And there's a lot of women who do that because we think we have to be the martyr. And there's a martyr complex thing going on with a lot of women, but that just makes you more devalued, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. So just because a relationship may be manipulated and set up by, this Cupid type of entity, doesn't mean it can't work out.
Right. I have couples who got married, and because of the awareness of one person, let's say, and sharing it with her partner who was open and willing to receive and willing to heal, they both were able to deal with the interference factor, and they both, prayed together, they worked together, they nurture the connection, and they're working it out, even though they know there's this manipulation thing going on. So you can't always blame it on one partner, but both partners definitely have to be willing to take responsibility for whatever is going on in their own life that may be a vulnerability factor. Let's say if there's an addiction going on, or if one person has an addiction to alcohol or drugs, or addiction to sex, or whatever it is, then they have to take responsibility to whatever they're doing to create that vulnerability. So that's why I think counseling is really good for couples, that it rarely works alone. I mean, it's hard to be the one in a relationship where you're the only one doing the work, because that's not a real relationship. That's called something else.
Yeah.
A real relationship is mutual, ideally, and where it's a mutual level of emotional intelligence and willingness to work and communicate with things. But, in a patriarchal society, women normalize getting the worse end of the stick because that's just how it's like. That, they're told, well, that's just how they are. And that's not true. They don't have to be that way. They need to be confronted and women need to know how to communicate to men, like, what are my feelings and needs, and how can you help me so that we can have our mutual needs and feelings respected here. And you just have to lay it on line. This is what I want and this is what I need. And okay, you tell me what you want and need, and then let's find a way to negotiate and work this together so that we both get our needs met, even though he may not think that what I need and want is important. That's irrelevant. You see, and there's a lot of people who they only think one side. They think with just the male side of the brain or the female side of the brain. We got to think with both sides of the brain.
Yeah.
And actually, women are better at being able to think with a male and a female brain, as opposed to men thinking with them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Women, we have had to become men and women in this culture and at this time, whereas men are still just being men. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I know in my journey too, what I thought I wanted and needed was totally skewed by my shadow aspects, by my wounds and traumas. And once I dealt with those, suddenly I was less needy and demanding, and I'm really easy to be around. I didn't think I could be easy to be around. So that all changed. So it's so important. Now, what if a person recognizes they're in a manipulated relationship and they already know that this is not good and they don't want to be a part of it, but that connection is still there, so they're still having that unrequited love feeling, they're still getting that energetic pull, the psychic stuff is still going on. What can they do about that?
That's where I would say, like, learning how to stop the obsession part. And a lot of times the obsession part is a result of a remaining psychic link that is still linked in with the psychic vampire person, or let's say the aliens who are, in my view, I think the aliens have technologies where they could put in implants. They may be physical or they may be energetic in nature, but they're able to, let's say, tweak one implant and the other so they can keep this resonant thing going on and keep the connection going on between two, so that one of them is always like feeling the other person and feeling the pull. So you have to delete that interference. You could either work shamanically or hypnotically with some of the methods that I described earlier to delete the interference, like remove the implants on an energetic level, and to make all efforts to stop the obsession of what that is. And that means taking responsibility to get your own needs met in which ways you can. And that's challenging, I have to admit, because it's the psychic link that can keep that obsession going, literally.
Yep.
And you have to cut those links and then create shields and barriers and firm boundaries so that relinking doesn't take place. And with psychic vampires, they're real good about trying to hook you back in, and they'll do it in different ways. And of course, that's in my book too, with just like relationship dynamics, how they try to hook you in by saying something. They're looking for a certain kind of response, and you just don't respond.
Yeah.
And you just stop responding in the ways that they're looking to hook you in, and pretty soon they'll get bored and they'll maybe go off to somebody else. But
yeah, and it's just like you said earlier, it's so important to trust our instincts and also trust what you know. Like, don't let this curiosity of what is this get the better of you.
Curiosity killed the cat, right?
Exactly.
Well, it's hard not to. So I have to admit, I was fascinated with this in my own experience, because I wanted to find who was the power source behind these alien visitations and this love bite. And then I had a whole bunch of experiences that was related to this higher entity on these other levels of creation that I interacted with. And that was a whole experience in and of itself. It's hard not to be, spellbound by this, by the weirdness of it and how it happens and how it makes you feel. But to stop the obsession, that's important, to just try not to get hooked into feeling angry or wanting to get resentment or take revenge on them. You'd have to just to really forgive and let go, completely let go. That takes time sometimes.
Yeah, but that is the key. Really letting go completely. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's huge self-mastery, but that's the whole point here in the final examination zone we find ourselves in, right?
Yeah.
These are coming, yeah,
Yeah. It's like
really,
we have to
really challenging.
work on
Really,
ourselves and,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, the effectiveness of how well we can be as healers is how effective we've healed our own wounds or are working on healing our own wounds. And that's a challenge because it's not something that happens overnight. And I think there's a lot of people out there faking it, and they're really not what they say they are. I think it takes a lot to be able to be a good healer and a good counselor and to be effective and to really be honest about what our own issues are and what our own needs are and what's really taking place. Is it our ego or is it something else? And there's a lot of ego out in, I call it the UFO entertainment community where, there's an alternative media and then there's the mainstream media and then you have, the people who want to get attention and want to be known for certain things, but you have to ask the question, why are they doing this? What's their motivation? And is it a popularity contest or is it something that's really of service to the greater whole? So,
have you had any case studies that that really showed the catalytic component of the love bite relationships?
oh, like what could, well, the aliens could catalyze a connection with someone if they're able to perceive that those two individuals had what I call a karmic connection. And this is based on a report from a few, more than a few really, who claim that the aliens, or they remembered having a former life with that individual. And just simply because they had a former life connection, it enabled or could facilitate an easier connection. So it could catalyze a pre-existent bond and just make it stronger, although it didn't always work. In one case, I don't know if I put this one in the book because it was a private case, but the woman remembered, and she was jointly abducted with two other men who didn't remember anything, and she remembered the whole thing. But she was told by the alien, it was a tall white alien who was setting her up with, I don't know if it was one of the men who she was taken with or another man, but they told her that they could perceive whether or not someone had a karmic past life connection because of, they were able to visualize like energy tendrils and frequencies of energy that connected people. And that when they saw that there was a pre-existent karmic connection, they utilized that to try to catalyze and strengthen a quote, a love bite. And so they would just kind of manipulate a pre-existing karmic connection and then just kind of wait and watch and see if it worked.
Also, with I think where I was truly going is the need, because we were talking about the advanced spiritual people, and that these kinds of love bite situations seemed not only to be with among the spiritual seekers,
Yes.
but that catalyzed their further growth as a outcome of this horrible pressure of being in these intense relationships.
Well, yeah, I mean, that happened to me. I mean, I could say it happened to me, but my position is that any experience that's difficult can be a catalyst of spiritual growth, depending on the attitude and the intent of the person.
Yeah.
Or it could embitter them and make them blaming and go back into denial and be a crappy, person in a relationship. So it's almost like a shamanic initiation where we use this experience. And in my own experience, it was as if that's what was taking place with this being that I called the father figure, who me and George Kavasalis talked a little bit about this based on, when you start confronting the aliens and you start trying to stand up to it and you get into this position of intense, determination to face them no matter what, and it'd be in this fearless, focused place, and then you may come into contact with the being that is like the header of the hierarchy controlling the aliens, and in my experience, that's what happened. And I met an entity that appeared to be good and evil all at the same time, who was, powerfully passionate and was able to consume me in his entire presence. And then I felt that my soul was actually part of this being. And then he would show me things throughout my life and experience, which sometimes he'd show me visions of things that were true and that happened. He would show me manifestations of power, how he worked through people. And I knew when he was manipulating a certain person or situation. And I was absolutely amazed that all this could take place. But at the same time, he was kind of a trickster. So it seemed to be a test to, he even told me, this entity, he said, I will sharpen you to a razor's edge. And that's what his intent was to do with me, to, test every ability that I had of perception, so that you never know really what you're contacting. You don't know if it's good or if it's evil. You just have to observe and trust the gut instinct that's in your soul to guide you through this process. So who knows, maybe it's a big mass initiation to wake people up. But at the same time, we can't have this naive view of, let's say, perceiving the aliens who took us and did these things as our masters and gods and teachers, when for all practical purposes, at their level of being, they are still a predator. They still are what they are, and they do what they do, and they're not going to stop. You see, it's just like if I grew up in an abusive family and then my father was really mean, but at the same time, as a result of the abuse, I learned many things that I would not have learned had I not gone through this experience with this particular person. But it doesn't mean that that person is a god. The perpetrator is still a perpetrator. You know what I mean?
That's right.
So I think a lot of people have these false views of aliens because they really don't want to perceive the whole picture, which is the good, bad, ugly, and everything in between. And they're only focusing on these good ETs and how special they are and, oh, how advanced spiritually they are and la, 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 la. And it's all a bunch of positive New Age crap, in my view.
Ours too.
Amen.
Yeah, but it is just, gosh, it's so important for someone who's experienced something like this, manipulated love connection, to realize the huge opportunity that it presents. I mean, it can be such a catalyst for growth, by facing, these deep, dark shadow aspects that otherwise were going unnoticed in a way. I mean, it really forces it into your face.
Sometimes, sometimes we have to be, I hate to say we have to be forced in some aspects. Sometimes we're so numb and unaware of our own shadow that sometimes we have to be hit upside the head in a particular experience to really realize, oh my goodness, I had no idea that I was doing this in a relationship and that I was unaware of this, and I was completely so disconnected and so numbed out that I was hurting my own child and my own relationships because I was numb, Sometimes we need people to just nudge us and slap us, and I hate to say it, I don't want anybody hurting me, but it's just that sometimes experiences will teach us things, and just to pray that whatever happens next, that you will be more open and aware, so that it could be a compassionate nudge instead of a slap in the face,
Yeah, again, it always goes back to awareness. So whenever something's happening in your life and coming up, it's that looking at it, being aware. Okay, what is this trying to show me? What can I learn from this? Once you do that, you flip it. It flips around.
And that's really the best choice we can make. Otherwise, I've seen some conspiracy researchers kind of go off the deep end with becoming so angry at the powerlessness of the evil nature of the shadow government or the way the world is going, and you could nitpick ad infinitum about all the evil in the world, but at some point we have to learn from our own experiences and make a choice on what are we going to do with what we have now to create a better understanding, to transmute this, and it's a challenge.
Absolutely. Yes. But we love challenges, right, lady?
Yes, we rise to the challenge.
On the other side.
Yeah.
Challenge is what catalyzes us, motivates. I mean, it is. The challenge is the great thing before us. We may not,
Although I think it would be good to learn from, like, the position of lucidity. Instead of having the nightmare wake us up, that we can be lucid in the dream and realize, aha, now I could just fly, and I can do this, and I can do that, and I can make faces at you, and it doesn't matter because I'm in a dream, haha, and then just hopefully create the reality that you want, instead of having to be woken up by a nightmare to realize that, oh, I was dreaming.
Yeah.
you know, and
Absolutely. Yeah, we're ready for the next step. Enough of this.
the next
Enough of this.
Yeah, but we got to
Done.
get through. We got to deal with our shit first.
definitely. But I think the women, we're more aware of it. I mean, let's face it, we as our gender is more aware of these deep internal processes, and I think it's our responsibility to bring that to the light and to help start the healing process for everyone. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen.
That's right.
You know.
That's what we're all about.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed being able to talk about the extent of this on the other levels instead of trying to keep it on a scientific other level. I mean, you know how I mean.
Yeah.
Some people don't
Yeah.
like to those places. They just don't know how to navigate it and not comfortable with that.
Well, our listenership is ready for the real information and doing the inner work and are about their self-transformation. And it's growing. So this hit right to the core of things that are crucial for the people who are listening. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on. And I do keep an updated blog on new interesting articles. And so if you have any questions, you can always email me through my website.
Your website is a wealth of information. I mean, you have so many articles, so much reading, so much mind-blowing things on there that just really, if you want to know what's going on, go to Eve's website and have a look at some of those articles. You're really putting the pieces together.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me, and I appreciate talking on this level, and hopefully it'll open up some doors for people, and get your book out as well. And I'd like to read it, The Shadow Moon, or
Stealing the Moon.
Stealing the Moon, yes.
Moon, and I'm going to send it to you, Eve, right after this. Now, tell us your website, the name of the book, everything that they need. How do they get hold of you?
Well, you can get hold of me through my website at evelorgen.com. And then I've got 2 books. The Dark Side of Cupid is the new one. You can get that through Amazon or Keyhole Publishing or Barnes & Noble. And then my Love Bite book is available through Amazon as well, and it's both ebook and hard copy. And the Universal Seduction is probably available through Amazon as well. And boy, there's a lot there as it is. So, and I'm on Facebook too. So you can
people do you do private sessions with people? If people would want to work with you, how would they get in touch with you about that?
Through my website, or you could just email me at elorgen@gmail.com. And I do sessions and consultations with people, and through Skype and telephone. So that's always, if somebody has some questions about a relationship or deleting alien interference, or just don't understand something and they want more clarity, I'm available for that as well.
Wonderful.
So,
wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to personally thank you for your work. I mean, your information on this Dark Side of Cupid really puts the pieces together for someone who's experienced something like this, which can be very traumatic. It provides such peace of mind and heart and the understanding needed to really let go and learn and grow from the experience.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Well, thank you. And you guys have a wonderful evening, and hope everybody enjoys my book.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners. Join us again next week on Shadowland Voyagers. We're going to be joined by Gabriela Cortesh, so that'll be quite interesting. We'll be talking about the Tao of spiritual relationships and her other book, Rewiring the Soul. So join us again next week, everyone.
Good night.
Okay. Good night.
Good night.
Regrets collect like old friends, here to relive your darkest moments. I can see no way, I can see no way. And all of the ghouls come out to play. And every demon wants his pound of flesh. But I like to keep some things to myself. I like to keep my issues strong. It's always dark.